I think the more we get to know Jesus and God and this relationship of faith, the more you realize how little you do know. And the more you learn about God's love, the more inadequate your loving feels, despite how well you love. And I think it was just the more you get to know God and who he is in his nature and how powerful he is, I think you realize how little credit we give him. Are we rolling?
Okay. What's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. We are still in South Africa today. We got Kyle's sister. Kyle's on the last episode. This is Kirsty. The whole reason I learned about South Africa in general. Didn't really know existed beforehand. No, just kidding.
Flippin' Americans.
But yeah, I came out here. We've had some crazy adventures, some very beautiful moments.
I think you've had a pretty good scope into the kind of life that I do have here. Very minor scale. But I think one thing that has stood out for me always when I'm showing people that are not from here, when you grow up in a place that you're exposed to and everything that comes with it, you do get used to it. And it's always nice to have a lens, almost to remind you, like an outsider lens,
Yeah.
to remind you that the stuff we see here isn't like everyone's reality, and it isn't always usual, and the opportunities we have aren't always like what other people would see as normal.
Yeah.
That's been really cool.
Yeah, when you were in Aspen, like, we're driving up a certain road and you're like taking pictures and you're like, oh wow, this is amazing. And I'm like, well, wait till you see this kind of mindset. And then same here, like, we're driving and I see a monkey and I get super excited. I'm like, guys, it's a monkey. And yeah, apparently those things are like,
I'm like, yeah, make sure you close the doors. It's like, what do you mean?
so yeah, it is very cool. I think one of my favorite parts of being here with you is just we both have the same mindset. I think, like, wherever we go, we do try to be a light in a sense, and obviously we could do a better job a lot of the time, but it has been cool to, like, pray for people, just talk to people. And there's definitely, coming to South Africa, there's such a different type of environment than Aspen.
We don't get snow.
There's obviously the beauty and the physical differences, but the people here, it is a very divided country as far as, like, economic wise and standards of living. And so I do feel like I do feel very blessed coming here, but I also feel the need to bless other people. And it's just it's so easy to do it here almost, in a sense.
It's impossible to please everyone. It's too much.
Yeah. It's just easier in Aspen. In Aspen, it feels like people already have everything. Here they have nothing. But I've also learned, that I think these will be deeper conversations eventually, but just the whole spiritual maturity, I think, of people that live in environments where they don't have everything the world has to offer, do have, in a sense, more of Jesus a lot of the time. So it's cool to learn from those people a lot of times, for sure. But those are some deeper, more interesting chats for maybe later in this episode or maybe later on in the podcast in general. But today I kind of want to hop into Kirsty's story. We have some interesting things on baptism. So I guess with that being said, without much of you knowing who Kirsty is, I guess it doesn't matter because you're about to learn. But essentially, I guess you grew up in South Africa.
Did.
You know who Jesus is. What's that?
I hope so.
What's that like in a place like this with a family you have? I know, just kind of go through.
Incredibly blessed. Yeah, I've never known any different. I was, like my brother, raised in a Christian family, very blessed with my family, and just the opportunities and experiences, the things we're taught growing up and just not knowing any different until you're old enough to kind of make your own decisions, and then really the foundations are already made.
When do you think that moment was when you decided it wasn't your family's faith, but it was your own?
When I left junior school, going into high school, we had this thing called SCA, which is Student Christian Association, and we had this, every Friday night, the girls after prep would go together. I was at a boarding school, majority boarding school, so I wasn't a boarder there, but a good percentage of the girls pretty much lived at school. And on a Friday night, I remember my grade 8 year, we were told to come to SCA because there's free cookies and
So for
hot
the audience
chocolate.
out there, SCA is some like
Youth group,
similar
kind of.
representation to a youth group, like a Young Life thing kind of environment. So,
But it was based purely in the school, yeah.
okay.
And so I was like, oh yeah, a lot of my friends that I'd met in high school, a lot of them hadn't been exposed to a Christian kind of environment or opportunities or groups like youth group. And for me, it was like, well, obviously, like, didn't think any different. It was just a bonus that there was hot chocolate and biscuits, and really got stuck in there, not really thinking anything different. And so I think the first camp just before I went to high school that I decided to go on by myself with the church that I was in, it had been like a build up throughout growing up where they'd do these altar calls in church or these like cool rallies, and they'd be like, like, if you haven't given your life to God, now's the time, you can do it. And I remember doing that, I don't know how many times, like couldn't count, probably, because every
One of those people
time
that kept getting saved.
I was like, can't get enough. Every time there was an altar call, I was like, I don't know if I really meant it last time, and I want to make sure that I'm being saved. So I might as well do it this time. And like, if it was real last time, I'm saved. But if it wasn't, then I might as well get saved for real this time. But the one that really stood out for me was in 2013, December. I think it was just before I went to high school. And I remember just the worship that night was different. And they did this call and something shifted in my heart. And it was like, hang on, this isn't just me saying it again and trying to secure my faith. This is something I want to discover myself. And I think that's the first time I said it properly and meant it, and felt confident in having said it, like secured. And then going into high school, SCA youth group, still didn't really know much. I mean, I had foundations of what you're taught in a Christian family, but hadn't discovered faith by myself.
What would you say those foundations are of, like, Jesus, but you don't, like, about him, but you don't know him? What do those foundations kind of look like?
I think that continuously alters as I got to know. That's coming up. Okay. Catch you after the break. The foundations were just the things that I was taught. I didn't know there was alternate truths to it. And when I came into high school, realized, hang on, this God that I've been taught is God. Other people don't necessarily believe that. And other people have different views. And that not everybody sees coming to SCA as just a must. It was just like part of the, that makes sense to me. I identify as this, like, obviously I'll go. And a lot of girls didn't, and a lot of girls didn't find there being like necessity in that. And that was, for me, became very quickly a safe space. And then I think throughout my time at high school, I was learning more about God and what my faith meant. We went on a lot of, in my 9th grade, so that would be, I don't know, freshman, sophomore, whatever, the first year.
Christy.
In my 9th year, at the end of the year, decided or applied to join the committee that kind of headed up and were the creators behind what happens at SCA and how they run it. And applied with a friend of mine. We're the 2 youngest people that had applied, only people I think in our grade, and didn't really think much to it. And at the end, when they were like announcing the new committees and stuff, our names got called, and I was like, oh heck, like what did I just do? Which also seems to be a little bit of a pattern in my faith. Yeah, stepping into things that I don't really think about and dealing with it later. But my grade 9th year was a really tough year for me, and so that was a safe space, and it was just allowed me to step into, you know, having a safe space, but realizing what it can be, what a faith can be.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I think in my grade 11th year, at the end of the year, I go on these mission trips with my brothers since I can remember. At the end of the year, kind of just like community service outreach, usually around Christmas time or New Year's, would go and just spend time with kids in an orphanage or a really cool organization, Live Village. We started going and partnering with them, and really on mission trips, people think you're going to help, but the work actually happens in you. And so
What did Live Village do, or Live Village?
they essentially, Titch Smith had a vision to create. In South Africa, we have, as you were talking about, the huge difference in economic status and opportunity, and from our history and past, a lot of inequality. And so we get a lot of people that are stuck in the poverty circle, not being able to be educated, not being able to raise a family, not being able to teach their children, which then can't get jobs, which then raise children. And it's this loop that's very
It's detrimental.
prevalent in South Africa. And so Titch had this vision. There's also a lot of very deep rooted, but essentially he really felt in his heart to buy this big plot of land and to create it into a village and a community where children would be able to get an education in a safe environment, where broken families and homes would be recreated. And so he would give people, mothers, opportunities who had lost their children, so widowed mothers that had, didn't have support structures or didn't have a life partner to raise children with, or had lost their children to whatever, and then children that had lost parents, orphans, and pair them, and they would do an adoption kind of a scheme, and each mother would get children to then adopt and look after, call her own, in this village. Yeah,
okay.
Not a sanctuary.
But it's like one big plot.
It's a big village, yeah. And so they created all these houses, and each family got a home, and the kids got an education, and they started community, and the moms got to create this community within other single moms that were able to then process, the trauma from their past, and how to move forward, and just given a better opportunity. So go check, Live Villages.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Pretty cool. And so this one trip in 2017, end of the year, and I would say up until that point, I had enough experiences in my faith to know that it was something I couldn't doubt. And that was small things, like I went on camps with people where I would see just small workings of God, like prayers that had been answered, people giving prophetic words, and people like speaking into my life, like people that I hadn't told anything to or about. A lot of signs, like physical and not, like verbal and not. I remember the one time I was sitting praying, and pretty early on in my own journey, and we had this station with candles lit, and I was battling with something in the season, and I remember sitting there and watching this little light like flicker, and then the light was going lower and lower, and I just felt like it resonated, and I was like, Lord, like, I don't know, I just prayed, called out to him, and I needed just something. And I closed my eyes, and as I was speaking to him, I felt a glow on my face. Like, when I closed my eyes, I'm pretty sure that, like, the candle was out. It had, like, gone. And when it went out, I closed my eyes and I was praying. And I felt this glow, like, in my face, reflecting. And I was just in the corner by myself. And I opened my eyes and this candle was lit again. And I was just like, someone has got to have seen that. Like, come on. I think that was the first time I was just like, did this just happen? Was this, like, is this a miracle?
Awesome.
You can't tell people about it because they're like cursed. Like, those candles were all lit. But yeah, I think looking back on my life up until, throughout, but up until I'd made the decision to follow him, and then all of the decisions after to learn about him, looking back on my life, I see so much, like, his work in so much. There were many, I won't say many, but there were definitely times when I was close to death or in danger or too young to realize what was happening in a worldly sense, and just feeling so covered from that. We moved from live in Hilton now. We lived in Joburg. I moved when I was 5. We moved because my mom and I was in a pretty hectic hijacking, and yeah, I was held with a gun to my head, and my mom was very aggressively handled, and, like, her fingers were almost ripped off, and they tried to steal a bunch. They threatened to take me, and I never saw that. Like, I never saw God's hand in that until years later, and hearing my mom's story, like, having grown up, and her perspective of it, and how she was calling out to God, and I didn't even recognize that, like, register that. So I've definitely seen him working in my life enough to know that I can't deny that he's real. And then jumping back, sorry, I feel like I've jumped this 3 times.
No, it's okay.
To grade 11, end of grade 11, 2017, I was at Live, and I think we had just had a day of activities with the kids, and we had in the evening someone would come and speak to us and would, like, give us a teaching, and then we'd have a time of worship or prayer or before people went to bed. And I remember John O. McCreary, one of the leaders at Live, he gave us this perspective on what he had come to understand prayer being, and it changed my mind, like, completely blew my mind. I'd never thought of it in the way that he had shared it. And at the end, I was really drawn to say this prayer. Didn't know what it meant, didn't know why I wanted to say it, never even thought about it really. I just remember going up to him and saying, Jono, like, I don't know how to express how I feel, and I have a prayer on my heart, and I want to say it. I really know I need to say it. I just don't know how to. I just don't know, like, I don't know what's pushing me. I've never felt this tug. And I remember him sitting with me, and I prayed this prayer, which changed my life.
Okay, before we hop into that, like, what was the perspective on prayer that, in a sense, blew your mind? Not like you don't have to go too big onto it, but like, can you boil it down to more of a basic idea, or?
I think the more we get to know Jesus and God and this relationship of faith, the more you realize how little you do know. And the more you learn about God's love, the more inadequate your loving feels, despite how well you love. And I think it was just, the more you get to know God and who he is in his nature and how powerful he is, I think you realize how little credit we give him. And it was just in our daily prayers, what our faith is saying to God in our prayers, our simple prayers, and not stepping out in big prayers that are actually quite offensive to him. Like if he's the God that can raise people from the dead, and he's the God that, is ultimately can say what happens, he defines everyone's path. Not praying the prayers that he's able to say is undermining what he's able to do. And I think Jonah really captured that in a way that made it real for me.
That's cool. Yeah. No, it's definitely people put a limit on God's favor, God's grace, God's love. When really the limit's just on how big are we. I mean, it boils down to our faith. Like, we're limiting our faith because of that.
God also portions our faith.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I have to ask, what was the prayer that was put in your heart to pray that night?
That night, I sat and I prayed. I said to God, Lord, put me through something that's so incredibly difficult that I will have no choice but to lean on you to get through it.
Dang. Those are the type of prayers that, like, I mean, they're beautiful, but also very scary in a way. And I think people, like, you don't hear people praying that often. 'Cause
I think I did.
did you think
I wouldn't recommend. I didn't think it through. I knew that I wanted to say it. I definitely think Big Man or Holy Spirit was covering something, because if I had thought it through and actually thought about what that might have been asking for at that stage, I definitely would have had second guesses.
Yeah. What did you say what you were praying to someone else, or was it just you and God?
I said it with Jono. He was there. I prayed it with him. I wrote it in my journey.
Thoughts?
He was stoked. He's like,
let's go.
He's like, man, Chris, like, this isn't going to be easy, but if that's what's on your heart, you have no idea what's coming for you.
Yeah.
And I think that blocked my processing at the time as to what that meant. I was just like, yeah, this is going to be really cool.
Amen, brother.
I was like, cool. If Jono said it, like, I really had a lot of respect for him. God had done a lot of big things in his life. And he had prayed, actually shared a prayer with me that he had, which I think inspired my prayer. And his was almost a little more hectic. And I was like, if God can work through Jono in this way and can equip him, and he's here sharing, and this on my heart, like, I know he can use me as well. I know he's going to use it. Yeah.
That's cool. I think prayers like that, and some that are similar, like, God, search my heart for anything that doesn't belong there, and, like, take it out of my life. Like, prayers like that are slightly similar. And it's almost in, like, a category of, like, I'm trying to think of, like, a good representation, but, like, let's say you have America or a country, and they have an army, right? You can choose to live in freedom in the country, in kind of peace, maybe.
Depends who you are.
Kind of tranquil, right? But I think when you say a prayer like that, you choose to be like one of the soldiers, like a Navy SEAL per se, like, okay, I want to go through just terrible stuff so that I can be part of what, like, this freedom, in a sense, like in a deeper way.
The bigger picture, yeah.
So that's really cool.
Yeah.
I guess the next question would be, like, what was that? Did you find something that happened in your life that kind of made you, I guess, look back on that prayer?
Was my prayer answered?
Was your prayer answered? I guess that's the question.
I hope it's been answered. I hope there's no more. No, I think it was. The next year was a really exciting and really tough year for me. At school, the way our school was kind of structured, we were all in boarding houses, and girls were divided amongst age groups. And it was my final year, and I was heading up the SCA with another friend of mine, and I had the rest of that holiday after that mission trip, really cool plans for it, and that I felt were from God. And that whole December processed a lot with my dad, just on how that would work and how to hear God's voice through it, and playing that out the rest of that year, I was the only, I'd say, spoken or open Christian or believer in my house, and one of the few in my grade. And
In
so
kind of your dorm.
each house had a mix of girls all ages, and they were assigned to a house, and like the whole grade would have classes split up separately, but after school, like extracurriculums, after school hours where girls would sleep, those all happened within your designated boarding house.
Yeah.
And so within my designated boarding house, I'd say I was the only believer that was pretty much outspoken or confident in my faith. And as I said, few of which were in my grade, definitely were in the minority. And there were a couple of girls in my house in my grade that were on very different pages to me, very outspoken, strong charactered, very liberal people. I think a lot of people which had been hurt by faith or didn't agree with faith or any religion. And so I felt super attacked throughout the year, girls having questions for me, from just a place of hurt towards religion, not necessarily towards me, and questions that I couldn't necessarily answer, or questions that I knew the people asking didn't want to hear the answers to. And so felt super isolated, super under prepared and under equipped, trying to show love, feeling attacked, not feeling like I could connect, not relating to their topics of conversation that they enjoyed or the things that they wanted to do. And so throughout that year, as well as it being probably my biggest academic year, there was a lot of pressure from family and from school, and from our universities are super competitive, and in order to open the doors that I wanted to hopefully take, there was a lot of pressure on that year. I was also super passionate about the SCA and this new plan that I thought, believed that God had for it. And so there was a lot going on, and there were multiple moments where I was like, this is really tough. And in the back of my mind, had a sense of peace knowing that this is building, this is going towards something. And it vaguely dawned on me, maybe this is part of the season that I asked for. Maybe this is what I need God through, and I did need God through it, but it wasn't ever a big click. At the end of my matric year, we have this big party for all the matriculants across the country called Rage. It's at the beach, and everyone's you stay with your friend groups, and everyone has beach parties in the day or goes to the beach or has big concerts at night, whatever. So I went for 2 days with a bunch of friends, and after that we planned a trip to Mozambique with some of the people within my SCA group, one of my best friends and sisters, Jess, and then we were super close to other schools in the area, and we kind of combined SCAs every couple months. We'd do worship nights together, and my best friends and fellow SCA committee leaders and committee members from the guys' schools. So we went with a group of SCA members basically from different schools.
Okay.
And Mozam was a place we always went with our family for a week in the holidays. It was our annual family trip, just a piece of paradise. And so I decided to go there for a week with my friends from SCA, to close off the year and be with people that I really loved going into the next year. And the plan was to then stay there when they all left and meet my family there for the next week. And on the night of the 13th, I said goodbye to my family, my dad that night, and I remember hugging him and saying, "I'll see you next week." And he said, "I'll see you in paradise." That's what we called Mozam. The next morning, leaving at 4 a.m., my mom dropped me off with friends, and we all went up together. We don't have a lot of signal in Mozambique, so every night before I went to bed, I'd go to the one place in the house that had signal, and I had a boyfriend at the time, and my parents a message just updating them, telling them I'm okay. And I remember the night of the 16th, I went onto my phone. It was about 12:30 at night. We'd literally just been lying outside looking at the stars and having chats about God and cool things with all of my friends. And I'm really bad on my phone. I hardly ever look at messages. And I remember going on my phone and waiting for like me to get connection and send my boyfriend and my parents a message, and I don't know why, but I never scroll down on my messages. Like, if you're below the line, I'm sorry, it's gonna take.
I can attest to this quality.
Speak to me in person, then I'll commit. Yeah, I scrolled down and I saw a message from my cousin in America, who very close with, love her to bits, and we keep in contact fairly regularly, but it was usually like we would never send messages. It would always be like, can I call? Or I would just call. And so this message I saw from her really stood out to me, and the first line just read, "Cursed, I'm so sorry, you're so strong, we'll get through this." Like, just a whole lot of like sending their condolences and saying it'll be okay. And I was like, that's weird. And I went out and I saw 2 messages from her parents as well, saying, "We're thinking of you, sending love in this time, we're here for you, we'll get through it," and not saying anything else. And I was like, what? Like, nothing is, you know. And right below that message were 2 missed calls from my older brother, and something inside of me just like, I just felt something like super uneasy inside of me, as if I didn't really get that from the messages, but my older brother was away in Thailand celebrating birthday with his close group of friends. And we have a great relationship, but he's not one to call. And so I saw these missed calls and I was like, something's up. And I called him back and he answered straight away, and I just heard in his voice that something, yeah, he said, "Cursed, Dad was cycling," and he collapsed. And my immediate thoughts were, okay, like my dad's in ICU. And there was a long pause on the phone, and then he followed with the words, yeah, Kirsty, he's not here anymore. And I think in that moment, everything around me froze, and it literally felt like slow motion in the beginning of a movie with a very fancy red wine glass, like going through the air. And it seems all peaceful, but you know that it's about to drop and it's going to shatter. And as it does, like shards of a million pieces just go everywhere. But it's still quiet. It's like the sound's being cut. And it's still slow motion. So you're like watching this and you're like, is this really happening? Sorry. And it was like a beautiful shattering. And in that moment, there was no one else around me, and I was taken, literally, like so vividly taken straight back to sitting, kneeling on the floor with Jono praying this prayer. And I felt physical arms around me, like holding me. I felt a warm embrace like I've never felt, and I felt like I saw the mess that was happening. It's almost like when you're watching a storm over a mountain and you know, like, if you're in the storm, there's rain and there's hail and there's lightning and it's scary and there's wind and you can't see. And you know how destructive that space can be and how much can be happening within that space. But if you're sitting watching it from afar, you know that like that's happening, but you're okay, you're safe. And it felt for the 3 years prior to that, if not more, I told people like, yeah, God, this peace beyond understanding, like it's a real thing, and like had no idea. Like I'd felt moments of peace and moments of tension and moments of anxiety, but I had never felt peace beyond what I can explain, and that was that night. And so this peace beyond understanding, and I sat there and like, my face was wet. I didn't even register crying, but I felt okay. And my friends then came out after and they're like, what's happened? I was like, my dad just died. Not quite like that. But I think they were confused because I felt peaceful. I felt okay. I didn't know what it meant. And if you had asked me up until that day what the worst thing is that could have happened to me, I probably would have said losing my dad.
Dang. That's hard. Yeah. Do you think it was shock? Or, I mean, is that like a common reaction from shock, or was that? I feel like shock would be different. Like you wouldn't feel like you felt. So I guess that.
I definitely could not process what was happening at the time. I definitely was in shock. But I definitely think I was covered by God in a way that I couldn't have any other way. Like feeling a physical embrace when no one was around me, and feeling peace when you've ultimately just been told your life is about to change, your life has just changed drastically beyond what you can see and know. And I've since met a lot of people that have lost loved ones, and you don't feel okay in that moment.
Yeah, it's just not what you hear when people describe what shock feels like. So, okay. So going from that, just like that shatter, I guess. What was did you ever question God days, weeks, years after that event? Or did you ever, like, what was the process after?
I remember meeting someone in first year of university. I was introduced to them because my dad had passed away shortly after her mum had passed away. And I didn't have anyone that I could relate to, really. And I remember chatting to her, and there was so much I could relate to her on. Like, so much I didn't have to say that she understood. The one thing she said to me was, like, I just don't understand why our parents, like why my mom, why your dad, what? And that's, I remember sitting thinking, I can't relate to this. I had never asked, like, in the terms of it should have been someone else. It had never been a thing of why me or why my dad. Part of me knew, and that's where we differed. She doesn't have a faith or a belief, and she struggled with a lot more things that I think, although I don't understand in a faith, it gives me clarity and it gives me peace and assurance. And the question was not why me or why my dad. The question was, if, like, you know how much my dad meant to me, and you know how much my dad meant to so many people, and you know the lives that he's changed. And if you can take him, there's purpose in that, which means there must be something greater. And so if you can take him now, the time when I feel I need him most, stepping into, and so much to come that I feel I still need him for, then there must be something bigger or something worth it. And in the really tough moments, the question I think then alters to what is it that you have in store? Like, how can we make the most of this? If you've allowed him to take it, let's not waste it.
Kind of like the game plan. It's a game plan.
Sure.
Okay, dang. So I guess, I mean, life goes on. That's it. Everybody has to. Like, I feel like a lot of people that get into that situation, it's either you reject God completely, or it does grow your faith in a sense that many of us can't even relate to. So, like, have you found, like, blessings or, I don't know, any sense of positive outcomes from, like, how's the game plan working out? Like, how many years has it been since he's
4.
4? So it's quite some time, I guess, in there. Like, what has life been like since, like,
It feels like it hasn't even been a year most days. I think it's the biggest shock is realizing how fast time goes without having someone around. But looking back, it's still really tough not having him, not being able to call him when I really need, and not having him for the big life things that a daughter needs her father in, or a family needs, you know, their father in, or at least would like him to be there. But I've seen already enough blessing and like enough positives in his death to make it already have been worth it, and I know it's not the end. And so, yeah.
oh. Can you give any examples of that, or? I mean, obviously hard to explain. There's so many stories that go so deep. I need so much context, but
I'm a person that really, I can't do like surface level.
yeah.
I can do it in very small doses, but a core value of mine is connection with people and being vulnerable and real. I think we've lost so much human connection over the last couple of years with the way society's going. And since my dad has died, I think I've met people like Sophie, I met in first year. I never would have met her if I hadn't lost my dad. And just to see how that friendship has progressed and how like we've been able to help each other. I've met people that I can relate to in ways I could never have related to before I'd lost him. Like I had had friends that had lost close members before, and I can empathize deeply, but you can't ever know what it's like until you know what it's like. And so I get to meet people in really cool ways that very limited people get to meet, and relate on things that very limited people get to relate on. I've been able to share my story and my testimony to so many people, and seeing how that's been encouraging. It's also driven me to do things more, I guess, courageously or sporadically than maybe I would have if he was still around, or in light of if Dad was here.
Yeah. Nice. Do you think if you didn't have the assurance and certainty that, like, you're going to see him again one day? I mean, I guess you already kind of talked about how your other friend that kind of went through the same thing didn't have that assurance and how it affects people so much, like, in a different way.
It does, and I think that is where a massive part of closure and peace comes in, is that the day my dad died, I mean, no one can ever say who's going to heaven or hell until we get to the due day. But from my understanding of faith in Scripture, anyone that I know, if there's anyone that I know that's going to heaven, I think my dad's going to heaven, and I rest in that. I know how much my dad loved us and how big family was to him, and if I also know that he would choose one day in heaven with God over life on earth with us. And although it's tough, it's not saying that he doesn't love us, it's just saying how sure he was in his faith, and he was a major influence of my faith, and so I think there's a lot of peace in that.
Yeah, wow, that's really cool. I mean, you bring up an interesting point, like we can't know for certain. I feel like I have mixed feelings on that, because, like, the Bible says you will know them by their fruit. You kind of like, I guess you'll know where they're at, kind of based on the fruits they've created or the lifestyle they live, in a sense. And that's not saying it's by works, but it's the works that prove the faith. And so I feel like, yeah, that'll be more interesting to look into the theology of certainty, I guess.
I think at the end of the day, we're not the judge, and so we can't say what actions or whose faith is bigger, because God is the ultimate determinant. Like, he gives us our faith, he puts the desires on our hearts, and I mean, if you follow Scripture and you surrender to God, you can think and hope pretty strongly that it's going to be enough, for we are saved, not by ourselves, we're saved because of the cross, but there's going to be a judgment day. I think with my understanding of the whole transaction that Jesus made for us, or did for us, it doesn't matter the actions that you've done or your life you've lived, as long as you come to God and declare him as Father, he covers your sins. And so I guess that was more for, really, I haven't died and I'm not in heaven, so I can't say, but I'm pretty sure.
I feel like it's almost looking like, if you look at a judge room, there's the judge, which is God. We're obviously not the judge. We're in the audience. And I'm not sure if the moment that we see someone's salvation, or, when the hammer goes down and says not guilty, if that's on this side of eternity or the other side. But that is a very, do we know for sure here or there? So I'm just pretty much rephrasing. I'm just thinking out loud here. I'm just going to think like that. But we are on the topic of salvation. And a big part of that is baptism. Were you baptized? When were you baptized? If you were baptized?
Great question. I'd wanted to be baptized for a while, at different stages in my faith. And I think there were things that I became more sure of as, I would say, my grade 11 and matric year, as I, learned a lot, exponentially more about faith in God, in having journeyed with the girls in my committee, and I had a strong desire not to be baptized in the church, like in the building, in a knee pool or in a normal pool. I wanted it to be in nature because I love nature. I wanted it to be by my dad because he was the biggest influence of my faith, and he also helped me to understand what baptism was, in and of the essence, and why we do it. And I wanted my family to be there in community because it is a public declaration, and so the opportunities that I had in matric, either, I guess, long story short, there were many years that I wanted to, or quite a few moments that I wanted to and never did, just because everything wasn't perfect. Like, either my family wasn't there, or, I had a massive like final exam, or it was going to be in a pool. So I kind of, like, when opportunities came up, kind of said, no, I'll do it at a different time. And then my dad died, and I realized I hadn't been baptized, and this massive fundamental block had been gone, and I was like, oh. I was really disappointed. Felt like I missed out on that. But then the next opportunity, well, then I went to Cape Town shortly after, and the next couple months of moving to a new city, starting a whole new chapter, living by myself for the first time, living without family for the first time, living with my dad for the first time, starting to grieve. Took a little while, still was taking some time. And the end of that year, or middle of that year, I went on another mission trip to Peru, which I think was the biggest step in me realizing this person I thought I knew as Jesus, I didn't know. Or I just it's like I've just finished level 1 and entered level 2, like didn't know this existed, kind of a thing. Just saw him in a way I'd never been able to before.
What did that look like? Not to go too off topic here, but
that is a whole other story. If you want to hear about Peru, we can chat about Peru, but
we'll make an episode called Kirsty in Peru.
Not straying from the topic of baptism, I came back and I was really moved by what happened in Peru, and it had shifted my perspective and faith so much that I had a brief moment glimpsing back on my life and my faith. And my brother was away on the yacht, my middle brother, and he was back for a couple weeks, and it was the first time, and didn't know when the next time would be, that my whole family was together. And I'd been wanting to be baptized, but it was really important that my family were there. And I said, like, if I wait any longer, I don't know who else is not going to be here. And I think I'd been so moved that I'd already declared God as Savior, and I'd already done things that I would never have done if I wasn't, led by God. And I think getting baptized at that moment was like, I can't express this in any other way. It's already late, and I wanted to do it, but it was more significant because it was just that it was quite cool how it was a new chapter of my faith, and it was
Nice. So who baptized you?
My brothers did.
That's cool.
Yeah.
For any of you guys wondering, we watched My Octopus Teacher. And one of the scenes, like, that's where she got baptized, essentially. It's near that octopus. Just a fun fact.
In those reeds. If you want to see some South Africa, if you want to see where I got baptized, go see My Octopus Teacher. And the days where, like, the seas were raging and that guy didn't want to go out, that was the day of my baptism, probably.
All right, so we have a listener who sent in a pretty interesting question that relates to baptism. I mean, it kind of is about baptism, so. Hey, guys. Just want to say that I've been loving the podcast since I found it on Spotify. Okay, we're going to skip that part because it's just self-promotion and it's embarrassing. Wondering if you could do an episode on baptism. Recently, my boyfriend, now ex, and I got into an argument about it, which ended the relationship. I believe it's an outward expression of an inward change. Her ex is from a church that essentially believes that you can only receive the Holy Spirit through baptism, essentially. And are saved because of baptism. So if you died before you were baptized, you are still going to hell. I really wanted to hear your guys' opinions and thoughts. So that is a pretty rough message for a few reasons. Breakups seem to be hard. I haven't gone through it myself, so can't relate.
So empathetic of you.
I think it is a very mature symbol that you are, because like the easy way is to not talk about anything in the religious or political world if you are just wanting to have fun with somebody. But if you are dating for a higher reason, I think this is a true sign and symbol of you doing that, which I think is pretty cool, especially in this culture. But raises a good question: baptism essential or not? Now, there's a few Bible verses that she also brought up in the message.
The second one that was raised by another commenter was Mark 16, verse 16. Whoever believes this and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned. Then the third one.
I got the third one here. I got 1 Peter 3:21. And this water symbolizes baptism, that now saves you also, not the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a clear conscience toward God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at God's right hand with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him. I think this one's the most clear on kind of what we're trying to get at, which is the concept of this water symbolizes something. It symbolizes baptism. It doesn't, the act of removal of the dirt and cleansing of your body is not what saves you, but more of a symbol of the true spirit and water that we, turn our hearts towards and give our hearts to when we accept Jesus. And so when we take that verse, I feel like my definition of baptism, you think of the act of someone dipping someone into water. And when that's what you have in your head, that is what it is. But when you can shift your perspective, or maybe broaden your perspective to, I guess, like baptism being you being cleansed with, Jesus' grace because of his sacrifice, then the word becomes more strongly focused on that aspect of it than the physical action of that. And the physical action almost becomes more of just a way that we can visualize it almost. What are your thoughts?
I think that does sum it up pretty nicely. It also says in Ephesians 2, I think verse 8, that we are saved by grace through faith, and that it is not by works.
Alone,
yeah. So that no one can boast.
Yeah.
And I think if it does come down to it, if we look at the transaction that happened on the cross through Jesus allowing us to be saved at all, it was through God's grace and his love that has made being saved even a possibility. And then if you look through that, that is ultimately, like, it is that transaction that is the pivotal point in Christianity that makes it, that is the difference between
life and death, essentially.
Other, like, big religions and faiths where it becomes relationship, where it becomes faith. It's not just because, oh, there must be something higher and, like, why is it God? It's this is what it's opened up for us. This is what it's allowed. And it's not, like, without him, we can't have life after death. And so it's by God's grace, and it's through faith, because through faith.
Yeah. No, I mean, the cross is such a beautiful place to look at all of this from, because, I mean, right when Jesus is on the cross and there's the two thieves on either side of him, he tells one, there's a dialogue that goes on, but essentially the end of that conversation is, to one he says, I will see you in paradise, right? I'm pretty sure that guy wasn't baptized. And baptism wasn't even a thing back then. Well, it was, but it was just introduced kind of by John the Baptist. So it was a new thing. But also the curtain, rips in half in the temple, kind of revealing the Holy of Holies to not just these very special times and moments where one person out of, thousands gets to go in there and be in the presence of God. It opened that to all of us. And now it's no longer by us having to follow the law, by us having to do certain things to gain access to God's presence and forgiveness in a sense, but it's more of all we have to do now is ask for it and believe in it. And so it's a really cool thing. And obviously Jesus got baptized. That baptism didn't make him anything more than he already was. That baptism was, from the way I see it, a way to show the people around him kind of who he was. And I think that's the same for us. Like, we get baptized to show people, this is what I believe, this is who I listen to, this is who I follow, and this is who I obey.
I think when that transaction clicks in your heart, I think that's what Jesus is looking for. He's looking for that heart change. I really do think that he looks at your heart and not, because ultimately your actions are then covered by Jesus. And I think from that, it's not to say then you shouldn't get baptized. I think baptism, we are called to be baptized.
And to baptize.
We are told to baptize. And I think that was that verse in Matthew. It says, therefore, go and make disciples of the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But if we look before, in verse 18, it says, then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And when we invite him into us and our heart changes, that's when the authority is transferred from him to us. And it's through that we are like encouraged and our heart is moved to do baptisms as a public declaration because of our relationship with God. And so I don't think it's the act in and of itself that saves us, but I think what comes must come before, because if someone goes and is baptized in water and they haven't given their heart, that's nothing. And so it really is the crucial lead up. I think the big thing is those moments before, what leads up to a baptism.
Yeah, we're reborn. I mean, in one of these verses, I think it was the 1 Peter 1, but he's talking to Nicodemus. And the wording they're using when, it's literally they're talking about being reborn, and Nicodemus is like, well, how can I go back into my mother's womb and come back out as a grown man? And it's just this, and then he goes into the whole baptism thing. But it's a way of looking at it that makes sense to us. And I think it's a very beautiful visual representation. And I think for me, it's evolved from not just showing people who you believe in, but it's also showing yourself. And it doesn't have to be when you get dipped in the water, but this isn't generally just accepting Jesus into your heart. And it's also a progression from there. It's not like you get saved and then you're done. It's like you get saved. It's a journey of understanding, and the journey never ends, right? We just keep understanding more and more, and we just figure out how Jesus and God is infinite, and there's just more and more to understand. But it's us giving up control. And I think one of the things men and maybe humanity most desire is control. We want to control our future, our present, and all the aspects of how those things work. We want to feel safe with control. That's how we feel safe. That's why money is such a big thing, because with money comes control. And so it's us giving our control, taking it from ourselves and giving it to God. Yeah, I think that sums.
So baptism isn't actually just being dunked underwater.
You're pretty much an octopus if you get baptized, just like in the movies.
It'd be in Better Beach, baby.
Cool. Well, I'm glad we answered that question. I don't think we have time for more, nor do I write any more down. But I think it'd be cool, unless you have anything else on baptism.
If that doesn't answer anyone's questions, or anyone has any thoughts or views or scripture, please feel free to bring
and
it
also,
up.
we understand there's entire sects of Christianity that have divided because of this issue. So,
but the Bible says.
The Bible does say some things, so we're open to talk about it. But I think we end off this podcast with, do you have any advice, any things that helped you greatly in your life? You think that
get baptized, kids, in the Spirit.
Anything that people you kind of understand who our audience is, that they would relate to or find helpful.
Sure. I think life's a journey of constantly learning. How can I say one thing that'll make, that can help right now? But I think it is just that there's so much more to continuously learn, and you being complacent or not figuring it out isn't going to help you get the answers. And I think we fear the answers sometimes because of the truth that we don't want to hear. But the truth's going to come out sometime, and you can only hold back from it so much.
Truth will set you free.
Apparently.
Apparently.
Yeah. I don't know, there's a lot, so.
Nice. Is there anywhere that people can follow you or reach out to you if they have any questions directly towards you? Or
Sure. If there's any specific parts or questions.
your brother
anything
did
I've
give out his phone
said.
number, but I wouldn't recommend.
Americans don't have WhatsApp, it's okay. Sure, you can reach me on my Instagram. I think I'd probably see that faster than I would see any messages. At Kirsty Sinclair _. But yeah, if there's any questions, there's a lot I do not know. There's some that I've learned. Always happy to chat.
Yeah.
Or any way you want to reach out. I don't know, ask Firestarters and they'll put you in touch with me if you can't find my Instagram.
Yeah, just thanks so much for being on. I think this will definitely not be the last time we have you or your family on. So I'm excited to see where it leads. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't seen South Africa or traveled to South Africa, highly recommend. Do, I don't know.
Let me know. I'll be a tour guide.
Be prepared to have a lot of your language judged and changed.
My name is Kirsty, not Kirsty. It's Kirsty. For those of you trying to find me.
Like and subscribe. Comment any questions down below that you may have for the future episodes. And we'll see you guys in the next episode. Nice. Let's hope we were recording.
Jesus is a friend of mine. Jesus is my friend. Jesus is a friend of mine. I have a friend